Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Squeaky Wheel is located on Haudenosaunee land and honors the sovereignty of the Six Nations, Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora. This acknowledgement does not rectify the ongoing violence of settler colonialism, but is rather meant to cultivate an unsettling awareness of its persistence towards building reconciliation. So I'd like to highlight one word there specifically, and that phrase there, and that is specifically unsettling settler colonialism. And I'd like to sort of think about that specifically in the context of how that can change even this specific residency program. Right before this session, I kind of gave an information session on how you can apply it to the residency program. And if you are interested in applying to the residency program, please do let me know. But there was always one bit of language that we had on there that always bothered me, sort of also coming originally from Turkey, which is that US citizens, permanent residents, and O1 visa holders can apply only. And I was having a conversation with the Oglala Lakota artist Kite, who mentioned to me that she can easily go and work in the United States and Canada. And as somebody who spent 10 years here, just sort of lugging all these big folders full of documents, I was like, wait, what? And at that point, I started reading about the Jay Treaty, which was signed between the United States and Canada in 1795. And among other things, it specifies that Indigenous people in Canada can cross and work in the United States without a visa or anything of that nature, but not the other way around. And it does have some conditions. So, I was, so now our eligibility to this residency just reads that all you need is a social security card just so we can pay. And that's all it is, right? And, so that's one way we think about how land acknowledgements can be a sort of domino effect, both in terms of how we think about personally about these borders and so on, but also how we can change our organizations from the very start, right? Just sort of looking at this sort of deep bureaucracy, this sort of language that we take for granted, and how that has to sort of shift, right? Because it's not U.S. citizens and that language of U.S. citizens and permanent residents only doesn't even, forget about decolonization, doesn't even honoring treaties that were made, right? But of course, the larger question is, how can art organizations sort of resist the kind of border making, the sort of violent border making of this larger nation? So, today we are very honored to have with us three brilliant artists and researchers, Dana McKnight, Desan Lopez-Castle, and Jody Lynn Miracle. This is the beginning of the 5th year of our residency program, which accepts media artists and curators from around the country, and also in Buffalo. We're going to hear from each of our residents in turn. They will speak for about 20 to 30 minutes. First Dana, then Desan, then Jody. I'll be introducing each, and at that point, after Jody, we would take a brief 10-minute break. During this break, we're going to take a cue from a recent sort of Twitter thread from the writer Eve Tuck, and I'm going to encourage the audience of, instead of immediately jumping in for a Q&A, to ask each other questions. And you can ask me questions too. I'm here for it, right? And then we're going to reconvene, and then we will have a brief Q&A and probably get drinks afterwards, right? I want to very much thank the jury of this residency program, Carl Lee, Yasmina Tumbas, as well as Kevin Klein, and our sponsors at the National Endowment of the Arts, New York State Council of the Arts, the Andy Warhol Foundation of the Visual Arts, and Erie County Cultural Funding. I'd like to additionally thank Jonathan White, the owner of the Airbnb where Dana and Desan are staying, and who's a member of the Allentown Association, and who asked me to tell you all about their upcoming Secrets of Allentown event in early December. Dana T. McKnight is a Black queer multimedia artist currently residing in Austin, Texas. Blending formal studies in cultural anthropology, Long Island University 2005, and sculpture, Minerva Kunstakademie, Groningen, Netherlands, her work lies in a plethora of medium splicing: speculative fiction, sculpture, installation, experimental sound and video, performance art, poetry, and painting. At the core of Dana McKnight's work lies a surrealist edge, the real world slowly picked apart through a lens tinted by magical realism and lived experience. Dana McKnight is a founder of Dreamland Art Gallery, an artist-run contemporary arts and performance space in Buffalo, New York, and a co-creator, Dreamland forever, and a co-creator of Rixay, radical inclusive queer sex education. In 2016, she was selected as a Living Legacy Artist by the Birchfield Penny Art Center. She is hood-raised, but spent several years living in London, Kyoto, and Groningen, and travels extensively. Please welcome Dana McKnight.
All right. Hey, you guys. Okay. Hey, X. Akram?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm like, wait. That's okay. Yeah.
Present?
Yep. Shiny. All right. Hey, you guys. So my project is called The Hood Will Survive. It's a micro fantasy and speculative futures of the East Side. Long-term, forever East Side resident, moved to the West Side to pursue a queer space. But one of the things that always struck me about the East Side, I'm from Cold Springs. I don't know if anyone knows the Cold Springs East Side area. All right. Basically, it's where Forest Lawn and Humboldt Parkway intersect, so that whole swath, which is kind of blighted OG Detroit malarkey at the moment. But that's what we're going to talk about right now. So we're going to talk about down-ass utopias. What is a utopia? Does anyone have a thought on that they'd like to put forward? Hands, feel free to shout it out. No? Yes. It's an ideal world, and it's coming from either a socioeconomic space, a religious space. Either way, it's a world you build that like brings ultimate happiness to the peoples within it. My question was, why are utopias rarely Black, POC-centric, and/or centered in post-colonial spaces, and why are they never set in the hood? At the moment, there's a lot of speculative fiction that's going into the realm of Black Afrofuturism punk, which there's a very interesting Southern steampunk function that's coming from the Jamisons and a lot of other pretty prominent, like, I'm sorry, I'm pretty nervous right now, writers. It's way more people than I was expecting. But one of the most prominent concepts of utopia that we know that has setting in Afrofuturism is Wakanda. But it's set in mainland Africa, and that's not necessarily enough for reimagining and decolonizing the imagination. So what have we learned from proto-Black utopic incarnations that have existed in colonial North American cities post-Reconstruction? So they're shut down because they are visible. B, they are shut down because they are visible. C, they are shut down because they are visible. I just showed pictures from MOVE, which was in Philadelphia. Does anyone know what happened with MOVE? Any hands if you know what MOVE is? So it was a utopic Black project in the 80s, and the Philadelphia police actually bombed them and destroyed several blocks worth of neighborhood and destroyed every single proto-Black initiative that was happening on a community level. So when we talk about utopias, a lot of utopic conversations and urban planning conversations are based on the concept of the beehive for like a sustainable intra-communal situation. Bernard Mandeville's Fable of the Bees is pretty interesting in that as sharpers, parasites, pimps, players, pickpockets, coiners, quacks, soothsayers, and all those that in enmity, with downright workings cunningly convert to their own use the labor of their good-natured, heedless neighbor. These were called knaves, but bar the name, the grave industrious were the same. All trades and places knew some cheat, no calling was without deceit. So his conversation was that to build a fruitful, civilized society, you had to basically destroy the concept of the knave. But what happens when the knave is usually black? And what would a meta-utopia consist of in the middle of the hood? So obviously, like, utopias are going to consist of educational systems, both formal and vocational, healthcare systems, holistic and science-based, food systems, sustainable, affordable, and accessible, green spaces, commerce centers, safety, and those well trained to implement it, financial self-sufficiency, which is and can be black market trade, community currency, trading outside insulated communities and groups. Evolution doesn't have to be a slow progress or even necessarily better progress. The evolution of the East Side from thriving black post-war, post-white flight neighborhoods to ravaged dead zone was a result of black anger in the wake of MLK Jr.'s death. Jefferson was a thriving black business center, and when MLK died, riots occurred, and it was burned to the ground. Most spaces have reconstruction. Jefferson has remained pretty much virtually the same since the 60s and those riots. So whereas most neighborhoods have faced cataclysmic circumstances, whether by natural or man-made impetus or summarily rebuilt and strengthened, the overwhelming majority of black neighborhoods have faced blight and are often left as they are or return to a state that is unequivocally blighted in comparison to their white and more resource-laden counterparts. Which brings us to alternate timelines and speculative fiction. I'm blasting through this because I have a lot to say. So what would the East Side look like if the trajectory of the Jefferson riots steered a secret, holistic black underground in a play, utilizing all the cunning survival strategies of the hood, which are secret spaces like trap houses, speakeasies. The thing about the East Side that very few white people have access to, and you probably will never, which is good, is trap houses, total secret commerce, black market, and speakeasies. There are at least 5 different LGBTQ black speakeasies on the East Side. They look like base level, like house facades. You walk in, the house is gutted, there's a bar, there's music, there's everything you could ever ask for in like a gay bar setting, except it's completely off grid and totally secret. And unless you're on the end, you're not gonna know it exists. Also, ballroom culture, which is an entirely separate situation that Pose actually brought to the mainstream. Paris is burning a little bit, but more people watching Pose right now. So a thriving black market of contraband, often bartered for other items, and stitches for snitches. Meaning if you report things, you're liable to get a little bit social trouble, if not physical. Mostly social though. Just because a market of safety tends to be away from the police. I see a lot of nervous faces in this audience. So what does a secret, voluntary nation state look like at its core? What would the trajectory of the East Side look like if power was placed in the hands of non-Christian, anti-capitalistic, shotgun held to the back queer femme elders? And it's okay to take a moment of silence to think about what that means. Because right now, most of the resources on the East Side are pretty much steered by black capitalism, which is steered through the black church, which is completely power-driven and very little, it's on a Reaganomics standard of trickle-down like economics, which we see hasn't fucking helped. Excuse my French. All right. So I created the concept of the Inyanga, which is actually an old Swahili term for healer. So in these speculative worlds I've been building for this project, the Inyanga are the force that is pretty much at the intersection of the Jefferson riots onward, in tandem to the Black Panther movement. So the Inyangas are absolutely amazing older women. That was the start, say in 1965-ish, the Great Burning, as we call it. Frustrated with the male-dominated Black Panthers, the Inyangas present themselves to the community through a 3-house, 15-woman block comprising of former Black Panther Party activists, medical doctors, factory workers, and contraband purveyors. There's no secret that Black women and Black femmes, particularly a lot of our trans Black elders as well, have paved the way for massive civil rights legislature and changes in this country. So in this fake timeline, we're looking at an alternate future that is actually like parallel to the one we're seeing right now, but what would happen if this alternate future was happening on the East Side as we speak? So 1972, the first Inyanga tong, and tongs were actually a Chinese secret society, usually comprised of 50 plus families, and it was just completely interlocked, caring for each other. So it was a tiny miniature ecosystem in like 19th century China that was completely fighting against the government. And they were actually like comprised of doctors, of workers, of builders. If you needed anything, if your family needed anything, you would go within this circle and it was all contained. And they were safe usually for generations. So in 1980, the first true neighborhood has been established, spanning several locations over the Cold Spring area. In 1991, alternate future life, obviously, environmental stewardship begins and expansion into other neighborhoods begins to take place. So we're seeing these tiny pocket insulated communities start to band together, these miniature nation states forming an alliance of care. The first generation is now of age to adequately share resources from their immersion into the outside world. So when we talk about utopias, we also talk about resources. And if the first wave of Black college entrepreneurs and engineers and doctors and artisans are coming out of the 80s, which is generally standardized the case, that's when the big rush of Black middle class began, what happens if instead of utilizing Reaganomics, they're actually doing full, true intercommunal work? So if someone's making $250K, half of that is going into the community. If someone is an engineer, they're donating their resources in like an involuntary social draft to provide for the community. It's very anti-American. So 2000, the first clashes began between the church and the Nyanga. A clergy-based city council member threatens to go public. He's found dead in his home the next day. There are now only 3 historic churches left on the east side, completely destroying the vacuum of power that is happening on the east side at the moment. 2005, the first true large-scale aquaponics system is incorporated to increase food production by 300%. So the entire base of this project was speculative fiction paired with actual living technology, paired with working systems, democratic cooperatives, and land trust concepts. What would the East Side look like outside of the realm of respectability politics? Yes, I did. Respectability politics, or the politics of respectability, refers to attempts by marginalized groups to please their own members and show their social values as being continuous and compatible with dominant values, rather than challenging the mainstream for what they see as its failure to accept difference. Obviously, this happens in every POC space. I'm specifically talking about primarily the Black experience of that, and as related to the East Side, where those respectability politics lead folks into an economic trajectory that does not put back into the community except for very base level philanthropic work. So let's talk about spatial possibilities for existing buildings. So this is a building on Ferry. It's 428 Ferry Street. It's been there and abandoned. It's not abandoned right now. It's got a church in it-ish. But it's been various items over the course of my entire life on the East Side. So what I've done is I taught myself architectural 3D CAD design to redo these buildings according to the concept of the Nyanga Tong and separate secret spaces that make things happen. So for example, if you take the cutout of this, sorry, it's a little like wiggly, you have the initial full building, and then there's a secret passageway underneath. The idea is that like most of the buildings on the East Side are facades, and underneath these facades of blighted dead space, there is thriving holistic community happening. The blight is to scare away white people. All right. And now a tale from the hood. All right, so I did write a speculative fiction piece because that's actually my main forte at the moment. And I'm going to read it really quickly, and then we're going to move on. I hope I didn't take too much time. Do we have time limits? Okay. Okay. All right, I'll be pretty quickish. Okay. Yeah. All right, I'm going to actually take these glasses off. Just waiting for loadage, which should have happened already. All right, so a little bit of history behind this building. This is actually on Halford Street, right off of Jefferson. The building has sat there obviously forever. It's been through 1,000 buffalo winters. There is like a little bit of switch outs of like who's buying what, but what often happens on the east side is that investors from outside of the city will buy a building, but they won't actually put enough work into it to keep it safe from the elements. So a lot of these old buildings are dying even more so. And all around it, obviously empty space because vacant lots when buildings were demolished by the city, and then the city kind of took a pause on that for a bit. All right, so this piece is going to be about this building. All right, take a little gulpy of this. All right. The streetlights had barely been on for an hour before a knock sounded at the door. Wrong one. There we go. Sorry about that. Just ignore that entire prior sentence. The girl strode quickly, her pumas separating the ratchet flotsam of the long, abandoned, grassy stretch that reached beyond the yellow den of the streetlight. Dusk had just fallen, and the summer sweat beaded on her upper lip and turned the air sickly sweet. She lived only a few blocks away, but the area was foreign. Most of the doubles were devoid of grannies and flowers on the porch, and the men strolling through paused in their erratic mutterings to give her a congenial wink or a nod to offset the terror of their pea-stained jeans. She'd only heard stories, soft whispers from her great-aunts who never ceased to mention that the fresh vegetables delivered to their porch every week were a result of the empty pews and the times were rough enough to eat the devil's broccoli. But it had been her cousin who had told her where to go. Her cousin whose stomach had ballooned and then resettled into its normal youthful paunch. So the girl went, her own belly softly swelling with every step, 14 years a lady, to find the blue milk crate man who would take her to the Nyanga because Peanut was a piece of shit, and the thought of being trapped underneath him again had begun to congeal into a persistent red dot in her panties. She had just reached the corner of Hartford and Jefferson when she saw him. A man on the corner huddled a squat, a bright blue plastic milk crate regarding her with rheumy eyes. A few yards away from him, a desolate brick house, the kind of turn of the 19th century ramshackles that had withstood 1,000 blizzards and could possibly handle 10 more. What you want? Not this baby, the girl said matter-of-factly. My cousin sent me. Who's your people? The man smelled like he had sat in his own feces, so her voice was nasal when she finally was able to respond. Annie and Ida Cobb. My mom is Cherie. My uncle is Peanut. The old man turned his head to spit. Screw Peanut. Annie and Ida teach you well? Yes, the girl nodded. Annie and Ida knew too many secrets, and she was now beginning to know them too, but they didn't know she was here because every baby was a blessing. She would take this to her grave. The milk crate man reached a gnarled finger through the milk crate, and there was a soft beep in response. You can go through. Back door is open. Close it behind you immediately. Be honest, she'll know. He paused for a moment, and then after obvious consideration, gave her a warm smile. It'll be okay. The man turned from her in a pleasant dismissal, reaching into his stinky pants and pulled out a tiny amber dropper bottle to put more things in his eyes to make them look soggy. The girl nodded, though she felt her asthma coming on. Sealing herself, she crossed the cracked pavement to the abandoned house. There were no streetlights beyond the milk crate, and the weeds surrounding the house had now become a small forest. For a moment, she grew scared. Terror synapses firing at the potential for violence lying behind the shadows, but she trusted her cousin, so she went behind the house and yanked at the slightly askew door. Light blasted her. Momentarily shocked, she paused, her eyes adjusting to the warm brown tones and clean white LED lights lining the walls of the narrow hallway. A whistle from behind her ripped through the shock. The milk crate man. The light from the hallway spilled out of the dilapidated house, lighting up the copse of trees behind her. Anyone driving by could see. You could see it a block away. Embarrassed, she nearly jumped over the door threshold, slamming the door shut behind her. The hallway seemed to take up nearly half of the entire length of the exterior length of the house. At its end, a metal door. Absently, the girl rubbed her arms to smooth out the sudden goosebumps from the blast of AC. With bated breath, she stepped forward, her puma silent on the freshly waxed floorboards. By the time she got to the thick metal door at the end of the hall, the sweat on her back had turned uncomfortable. There was no doorknob, so she gave it a hard knock with the flat of her palm, acutely aware of the sensation of being watched. Cameras in the ceilings. It only took a second, but then the door opened and a woman, older and taller than her by a good span, stood sizing her up, a gun on her hip. The girl faltered. I'm here. The woman smiled. I'm here to help you for the evening. And that's that.